welcome and thanks for joining. My name is Kim Umbach. I'm the volunteer coordinator alongside Hope. I'll introduce those that will be presenting. We have a number of our staff online today as well. So Suzanne Rumsey will be sharing and opening us with some prayer and handling our Q&A. Jacqueline Coster is our Director of Programs and Partnerships. We'll be sharing a little bit about the context of some of the international aid cuts and changes and how that's affecting our partners. Bart Dickinson and Andrea Casey are also part of our Programs and Partnerships teams and will be partnering up with Jackie to make this presentation. And then we will have a little bit of time for Q&A. We will also be hearing a little bit about what we at Alongside Hope are doing to respond. Partly, we're talking about Pray, Act, and Give. So we'll learn about certainly all of those giving opportunities and a bit of advocacy work that we're going to be doing.
Thanks, Kim. I've been tasked with two things right now. One is to offer a land acknowledgement, and the other is to lead us in an opening prayer. Our current strategic plan has an acknowledgement, given that we are a national organization, although we are situated, our offices are situated in Toronto. We work nationally, as you all know, and so this is less a land acknowledgement and more an acknowledgement. So, Alongside Hope acknowledges Indigenous rights as inherent, including rights to land, water, access to resources, and rights to self-determination. We affirm the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the calls to action of the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation. And we take actions towards reconciliation in consultation with our Indigenous colleagues and partners. This prayer comes from Bishop Dion Johnson of the Episcopal Diocese of Missouri. Let us pray. Give unto us, O God, the gift of now. Now is the time to advocate for justice. Now is the time to speak truth to power. Now is the time to fight hatred. Now is the time to stand with the outcast. Now is the time to resist the power of evil. Now is the time to make no peace with oppression. Now is the time to love our neighbors. Now is the time to walk humbly with our God. Now is the time to say no to discord. Now is the gift we have been given. O God, walk with us in the now. Amen. And I'll pass over to Jackie.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Suzanne. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today. I think oftentimes when we're talking with partners, we talk about how there is this support in Canada. There are people who are praying for them, people who are constantly thinking about the situations of their neighbors around the world. And to me, these are always moments that affirm what that looks like in practice when it is taking time out of a day to learn a little bit more about what is happening in the work that we're doing as Alongside Hope, alongside many partners at the moment that are hurting through these cuts that we're seeing in various aid work around the world, most prominently with the US administration cuts. So as mentioned, I'm the Director of Programs and Partnerships here at Alongside Hope and have the privilege of working with a small team that connects with all these various partners around the world. And today, Bart and Andrea are going to be joining me and just talking a little bit about what the impact is on our partners in this time. So Bart is going to be moving me along through slides and trying to keep me from taking up all of the time this afternoon. But just starting with a little bit of the context, and Bart, if you want to move along to the next slide. So today we're going to be talking a lot about the US administration cuts, in part because they have triggered a lot of conversation and a lot of consternation around the world, but also because of the size of those cuts and how devastating those have been to existing programming and ongoing programming. So you'll see a bit of a blending today of the US cuts, but also some other cuts that have been made by other governments, and also reflecting a little bit on what do we do in Canada? Where are our points of strength? Where are we working as a country? Very mindful that we are in an election season, and this is the time to be asking delegates and candidates questions about international aid. Now, we do use a lot of terminology around international aid here at Alongside Hope. It's more about solidarity and partnership than it is that sort of mindset of a provision of aid. But when we talk about statistics and numbers, there is still a lot of that terminology that weaves through. There's also a campaign at the moment called Aid Matters, or Aid Works, sorry. So some of that terminology you'll hear us switching between quite a bit throughout this presentation. So if we can move along to the next slide. I want to start with the US cuts because they are sort of the launching point and the magnitude of them. So when we look at USAID funding, and that can include as well funding from the State Department for refugees, they are the largest development actor, or were the largest development actor, with the layoffs that have taken place and coming down to an organization of 15 people as of July, from an organization of 10,000. Obviously, they are no longer claiming that spot. But as the largest development agency, their budget is significant and has been significant over the years in terms of the role it plays in key development and humanitarian agendas. And just to put that in context and in comparison to the Canadian budget, I think is sort of an important juxtaposition as we think about the overall context and the role that we play here in Canada. Marco Rubio, who is the Secretary of State, has indicated that 83% of programming will be permanently cut. It's currently on a 90-day pause as they review each and every program. And he's stated that he has three simple questions when he's looking at the value of each program. One is, does it make America safer? Does it make America stronger? And does it make America more prosperous? So these aren't traditionally the questions we associate with international assistance or working in solidarity with those around the world, but really point to a polarized agenda looking at sort of state interest first and foremost. So when we look at the modeling around this and see the scale of those cuts and the resulting impact just in sub-Saharan Africa alone, 5.7 million African will be back below the extreme poverty line by the end of this year, just on the basis of the USAID cuts, not taking into account cuts that are being made by governments like the UK, by Sweden, by Germany, and by a number of others. As we all know, dropping international assistance doesn't usually cost politicians much, particularly when they can see other priorities in country requiring budget attention. So if we can move to the next slide. So I want to start just as well by setting a little bit of where are we in Canada when we talk about international assistance. So there's a really good website for anyone that's interested in numbers and digging deep into the numbers called AidWatch. And I certainly encourage you to find your way over there and have a look at some of the trends and some of the patterns that we see in Canadian government assistance. I think many of us on this call will be familiar with the 0.7 target that countries have set in terms of 0.7% of GDP being provided for international assistance. You can see in the latest numbers here, this is looking at Canadian development assistance from 2015 to 2024, that we're at exactly half of that at the moment, so at 0.35% of GDP. So not hitting our target of 0.7 and have not hit our target of 0.7 at any point in the last decade. When we look at how that money is dispersed among Canadian actors, again, just highlighting there the important role that various agencies around the world play. But as Alongside Hope, we fall into the Canadian civil society category there of 19%. So not insignificant, but also many other significant actors that play an important role in the way Canada disperses funding around the world. We move on to the next slide. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about humanitarian aid. And then Andrea is going to talk about the impact this has on gender. and Bart on HIV/AIDS programming around the world. So when we think about humanitarian aid, it's a very old system. It really goes back all the way to the 1800s with the establishment of the Red Cross and a lot of global norms and international humanitarian law that has been established that give guidance to the way humanitarian aid works. So there are a number of key principles that come into play when we talk about humanitarian aid. That aid is provided in a neutral manner, that it's given independently of any government agendas or restrictions, that it is reaching those that are most in need. So really putting need as the foremost driver of humanitarian assistance. The humanitarian context is really framed by these norms. And if we move to the next slide, we've been talking for a number of years already about the shrinking humanitarian space. And it's sort of a very sector-specific lingo, I suppose, when we talk about humanitarian space. But essentially it means that humanitarian space was protected when everyone respected and followed the humanitarian laws and the humanitarian norms. And when those humanitarian laws and humanitarian norms aren't being respected, you see attacks on NGO workers, you see governments not giving access to certain parts of the country because of political reasons. And we've seen this a lot in a number of places in the last decade. At the moment, you see this on a daily basis in Gaza. Picture on the right here is of our partner, the Diocese of Jerusalem, and the Al-Aqli Hospital in northern Gaza, which has been targeted a number of times by the military throughout the conflict. You also see it at the moment in Myanmar, where the government is not allowing access to certain parts of the country because of the civil war. If we move on to the next slide. So by far the largest and quickest impact of the USAID and State Department cuts has been in the humanitarian sector. The US government, and this is numbers from 2023, provided 51% of humanitarian assistance funding. And I include the quote there to the left of some will recognize from Luke, but this idea that to whom much is given, much is expected. And when you look at the US government and the US state, I mean, they are by far the largest economy in the world. And when you look at their budget, they spend $71.9 billion in 2023, and that works out to just over 1.2% of the federal spending, which is over $6 trillion. So it's sort of to keep in context the size of the economy from which that 51% is coming. But I think looking also at the rest of the pie chart there, Canada at 2%, but you also see the EU, Germany, and Norway, which have also all made reductions in recent weeks to humanitarian funding. We can move to the next slide. So where we see that, I think most significantly for us as Alongside Hope, is the reduction in funding to the World Food Programme. So as Alongside Hope, we are a member of the Canadian Food Grains Bank, and the Canadian Food Grains Bank receives funding from Global Affairs Canada, and then that funding is a match funding to the money that we raise as members. And there are 15 denominationally based relief and development agencies. And collectively, we do about $80 million of programming a year, both in emergency food assistance, but also in long-term agricultural and livelihoods programming. Now, that programming is really dependent on the infrastructure that is created by the World Food Programme and by the emergency food provisions that happen through WFP. So right now, we have a program with a partner in South Sudan, and that program takes advantage of World Food Programme storage, World Food Programme boats that move food up rivers into areas that are not accessible by road. And so without funding for that infrastructure, the budgets of our Canadian Food Grains Bank projects will be increasing because we'll need to be able to fund warehouses, fund transportation, that previously we could rely on the World Food Programme system to provide that as in-kind support to a Canadian Food Grains Bank project. So you cannot underscore enough how devastating the humanitarian cuts are on food assistance around the world. It is in that 90-day pause at the moment, and there is some reason for optimism that the humanitarian assistance portfolio may be an area that the US does return some funding to, especially around food assistance, as unlike Canada, where none of the food needs to come from Canada anymore, all of the US food assistance is provided by US farmers. So there's a direct benefit to US farmers when we talk about international food assistance from the United States. So if we can move to the next slide. Another pivotal piece of infrastructure that has been completely destroyed by the US funding cuts is a system called the Famine Early Warning System. And this had been a really groundbreaking approach in the last 15 years of looking at weather forecasts and early warning indicators around agriculture yields so that we could be able to predict out where there may be food shortages in the upcoming 6 months. And so there was a website called fuse.net, so FuseNet, that provided that information, really good analysis to any organization, to the UN system, to the public, to agencies working in countries. And that was a planning tool that was instrumental in determining pipelines of funding within the World Food Programme, but also for organizations like CFGB and Global Affairs Canada. We looked at FuseNet to determine what should be the priority countries for the upcoming 6 months. And a lot of those decision-making mechanisms aren't available anymore because the data that drove those decision-making mechanisms has been cut off. And we see that happening as well in the health sector, where data simply isn't being collected, and data that is being collected isn't being shared. So if we can move to the next slide, Art. So just to share briefly in really concrete ways, how does this impact on our partners? So we work with Church World Service in Kenya and Tanzania. We've worked with them since 2016. They are the largest, or were, the largest refugee resettlement organization in the US. They had a contract worth $65 million to assist in the resettlement of 120,000 refugees. It is a unique fund where it's a drawdown fund. So there's a contract signed with State Department for the money. And as that money is spent, it's reimbursed by the US government. So they're actually owed $25 million for work that was done in the last quarter of last year. They are part of a lawsuit in the US at the moment, looking to see what can be done to reclaim that money that is owed. But in the meantime, essentially, they've had to lay off all of their staff in Kenya, 750 staff that were working on the refugee resettlement program. So utterly devastating for them as an organization, but all the more devastating for refugees who were literally turned away at the airport as they were to be headed to the US for resettlement after years and years in process. We've seen similar impacts with Finchurch Aid in Uganda and Kenya. We aren't working with them in either of those countries, but we do work with them in South Sudan. And so terminated contracts in refugee camps in those countries has a direct impact on South Sudanese refugees who have fled into those countries. And again, with Canadian Food Grant Bank, we've lost predictive tools and the leveraging of the World Food Programme pipeline that we really benefit from in terms of being able to move food into locations quickly and at a very low cost. So devastating impacts at the moment on the humanitarian side. We also see it in more indirect ways that without the political pressure of the US, for example, at the moment in Myanmar, there isn't movement by governments to allow access of humanitarian actors into areas that have been impacted by an emergency. So definitely, a big area. I need a lot of prayer around where we move from here. So I'm going to stop there and pass it along to Andrea to talk about the impact on gender.
Hi, thank you so much, Jackie. I'm going to start just by doing a really brief overview of kind of the global frameworks we've seen for the past 25 years. That includes how why gender is so important in the work and talk about the impacts. So, Bart, if you want to go to the next slide. So in the year 2000, world leaders committed to the Millennium Development Goals, or the MDGs, setting global targets to reduce poverty, improve health, and advance gender equality. These efforts contributed to real progress, including a decline in maternal mortality and a significant gains in primary school enrollment for girls. However, the MDGs fell a bit short in addressing systemic issues like gender-based violence and social and economic exclusion. So to achieve more people-centered sustainable development. The Sustainable Development Goals were adopted in 2015. You can go next slide, Bart. SDGs address gender equality as both a standalone and as a cross-cutting priority, recognizing that gender inequality impacts all aspects of sustainable development, such as poverty reduction, health, education, and economic growth. Canada has been a strong advocate in this space. For example, in 2017, the Feminist International Assistance Policy was made gender equality central to Canada's international aid efforts in part by allocating 95% of our bilateral aid to programs that integrate or target gender equality and prioritizing sexual and reproductive health and rights, education, economic empowerment, and peace and security, especially for women and girls. Under this new focus, alongside Hope's All Mothers and Children Count project, which ran from 2016 to 2020 and was funded by Global Affairs Canada, was able to expand to include adolescent sexual and reproductive health services, ensuring youth, but especially girls, had access to essential health education and contraception. So for the last quarter century, you can move on, Bart, work in the sector has been guided by these goals. Countries created policies to support the commitments to help move towards success in the MDGs and SDGs. Bart, you can move to the next slide. Our partners in their countries are also working under frameworks to achieve these same goals. These goals remain, but now with 25% less funding, as you can see here. So you can move on, Bart, and I won't get you to change so much. So why does this matter? Sorry, one more. When women and girls have access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunities, they reinvest in their families and their communities and drive long-term social and economic progress. Cuts to international aid or international solidarity, particularly for sustainable development, but for humanitarian aid as well, will disproportionately impact women and girls, as they are often the most vulnerable in times of reduced support and exacerbating existing inequalities. For example, women make up nearly half of the agricultural workforce, but lack equal access to resources. So when equipped with the right tools, they increase food production and strengthen climate resilience. Yet cuts to international assistance leave female farmers with less support, worsening food insecurity and increasing economic instability. And when families struggle financially, girls are the first to feel the direct impact. They're the first to be pulled from school to work or help at home, making them more vulnerable to exploitation and facing higher risks of child marriage. Currently, over 12 million girls are married as children each year, and this is a number set to rise as funding globally declines. In low-income countries, 1 in 49 women die from pregnancy-related causes, a crisis that worsens when sexual and reproductive health care programs are cut. With a reported 92% cut in USAID sexual and reproductive health funding, this threatens lives through limiting access to prenatal care, safe childbirth services, and contraception. Without contraception and sexual and reproductive health care, unintended pregnancies rise, unsafe abortions increase, and maternal mortality rates spike. Gender-based violence remains a pervasive threat also, with women and girls facing high risks of domestic violence, trafficking, and exploitation. While stronger laws and crisis response programs have led to progress, funding cuts threaten to erode these vital protections. Additionally, women in conflict zones face heightened risks of violence, displacement, and healthcare loss. And in some settings, up to 70% of women experience gender-based violence. You can go to the next one, Bart. And these cuts are already having impacts on our partners. So the Maison Dorcas of the Pansy Foundation in the Democratic Republic of Congo is a transit and community center offering safe space for survivors of sexual and gender-based violence to heal, rebuild, and regain independence. Things have been changing quite a bit in that context right now, in addition to having to navigate ongoing and intensifying armed conflict, which is increasing gender-based violence and sexual violence against women. They've also had to shelve programs, a program designed to respond to gender-based violence that was awaiting possible USAID funding, which they had received in the past. our partner in Uganda, one of our partners in Uganda, the Rape Hurts Foundation, has been a lifeline for survivors of sexual and gender-based violence and human trafficking. However, due to recent funding freezes and cuts, their ability to provide essential support for survivors has been compromised quite severely. Over 385 survivors rely on Rape Hurts Foundation for critical services and face delays and or complete loss of support in emergency medical care for survivors of sexual violence, shelter for those escaping traffic and abuse, legal aid for survivors seeking justice, and vocational training to help survivors rebuild their lives and achieve economic independence. And this isn't only impacting women who are seeking help, as Jackie mentioned, it also impacts the staff and community workers who depend on funding to continue this life-saving work. As you may or may not have seen, Alongside Hope has recently launched a resilience fund. So we're looking to provide some emergency relief to supporting essential services such as counseling, medical support, shelter, and food for Rape Foundation, among other solidarity grants. Also looking at supporting awareness raising, continuing outreach initiatives. But efforts cannot replace sustained international investments. So Bart, you can carry on talking about HIV/AIDS and
Thanks,
dispute.
Andrea, much obliged. So I'm going to talk a bit about specifically this 90-day stoppage, and there are very key specific areas that are being impacted by this. So as Andrea mentioned, our Resilience Fund, which was launched, is really intended to support our partners address some of these key exigent emerging supply shortages and challenges that are faced by our partners as a result of these cuts. So talking a bit about HIV/AIDS, so launched by U.S. President George W. Bush in 2003, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, or PEPFAR, was instituted in 2003. It's known as one of the most successful development interventions worldwide, credited with saving over 26 million lives since its inception. And through PEPFAR, the U.S. government has invested over $110 billion in global HIV/AIDS response through USAID and the State Department, by far the largest commitment by any nation to address a single disease in history until COVID-19, which prevents millions of HIV infections, accelerates progress towards controlling the global HIV/AIDS pandemic in more than 50 countries. PEPFAR doesn't just support antiretroviral treatment and clinical treatment services, but also prevention, research, and development for new HIV treatments. And just to give you a sense of the impact that this will have, before the aid cuts, the United States funded 70% of the global HIV/AIDS response. That means 70% of all funding that has gone to combat against HIV/AIDS, which is one of the most successful development stories over the past 3 decades, has been largely funded by the United States and by PEPFAR. And this is an infection, a virus that doesn't take well to 90-day stoppage to reevaluate the funding. This 90-day funding stoppage is devastating. It means over 130,000 babies in this 90-day stoppage period alone will be born with HIV because their mothers couldn't continue antiretroviral treatment through their full pregnancy. This is mothers unable to protect their unborn child from a lifetime disease that under normal circumstances in the global order has been completely preventable for the past 2 decades. Numbers from the Foundation for AIDS Research tell the story. Over 20 million people are supported on an ongoing basis by PEPFAR antiretroviral treatment. 270,000 plus healthcare workers have been ordered to stop all activities. That amounts to 191,000 full-time positions stopping specifically in the response to HIV/AIDS treatment. This will heighten transmission rates, will heighten the transmission from mother to child through breast milk. And AMFAR, again, estimates that during this 90-day stoppage, 136,000 babies will acquire HIV. And for every day of the stoppage, about 1,500 new HIV infections will occur. The impact on our partners has been quite dramatic. Several Alongside Hope partners have seen significant impacts because of these cuts. Our partner, Anglican Development Services Eastern in Kenya, has a PEPFAR-funded program supporting over 8,500 children with HIV/AIDS. This has impacted 12 staff and 163 caseworkers forced to stop immediately, and they are already observing people not adhering to their antiretroviral treatment schedules, which heightens the increases the likelihood of transmission and contracting or passing on HIV or the virus to others. Our longstanding partner, EHALE in Mozambique, which some of you might be familiar with, is responsible for our Solar Suitcase initiative and spearheading that in northern Mozambique, had a USAID-funded program called Alcanzar, which means to reach, which is a 5-year program oriented at improving services for rural maternal health. This has been ordered to stop operation completely during the 90-day review. Our partner Village Health Works, or VHW in Burundi, which you might be familiar as a former partner with our All Mothers and Children Count project, along with EHALE, is observing a $1 million operational shortfall with key shortages in access to supplies of antiretroviral drugs provided by PEPFAR and ready-to-use therapeutic food supplies, which are used to treat severe acute malnutrition, much of which were procured and distributed through USAID procurement channels. The ongoing conflict in the eastern DRC, which is happening between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, is seeing an influx of refugees that's putting stress on an already delicate and stretched thin system. So just to get a sense of what our response has been so far with our Resilience Fund, our Resilience Fund is committing funding to provide immediate support, again, to partners specifically impacted by these cuts, providing life-saving, dignified care and helping address immediate urgent needs with a lens to sustainable long-term solutions. So the Resilience Fund is supporting our partner Village Health Works, support the establishment of a community-led, community-owned domestic production facility for ready-to-use therapeutic foods. So using local oil, local ground nuts, and milk products, and borrowing from the expertise of social enterprises that are currently involved in the production of ready-to-use therapeutic foods in the United States. They're looking to create a domestic production facility that will create jobs, create impact, create jobs, create income for local communities, and also aspire to make the region less reliant on external food aid and food supplies when these kinds of shocks to the system are occurring. So this will hopefully, again, support a local solution that is locally owned, community-driven, sustainable solution, but and in that way mitigating some of the longer-term impacts of some of these cuts, but acknowledging that the deficit that we're dealing with is magnanimous and that our partners are still struggling with that. So I'll pass it over to you, Jackie, to close us out.
Thanks, Bart. Indeed, the magnitude of the situation really you hear often this is an existential crisis, that the way of working will have to fundamentally change. We're going to need to adapt. We're going to need to think very differently about the way we do this kind of work. How do we stand in solidarity around the world's poorest and looking to continue to reach for the goals that we've set for ourselves? We see the immediate consequences in our day-to-day conversations with partners. We just see the deepening of those consequences and a real recognition that there's going to need to be a sustained response. So the resilience response is certainly an important first step, but how do we continue with advocacy, with programming, with prayers to sustain a long-term response, and then look at Canada's role going forward as well. So I'm going to pause there. I know we've promised time for questions. And this would be a good chance to take any questions related to the programming side, and then colleagues can move on to talk about the advocacy work that's underway at the moment as well.
Thanks very much, Jackie and Bart and Andrea. That's a lot of information. I'm sure you're not as participants suffering from a lack of information, but an awful lot has been, as you can see, happening on the global scene. And we are, as Kim mentioned, recording this webinar. So if when you receive the recording, might be useful to go back to listen to some of that and look at the slideshow again. Just want to welcome to the webinar Louis Bélanger from Cooperation Canada. And it's Cooperation Canada that we, along with many other international development NGOs in Canada, work with in coalition. And Cooperation Canada, who is helping to shape the advocacy campaign that is the title of this webinar, which is #AidWorks. And so very pleased that Louis was able to join us in the midst of all that Cooperation Canada is dealing with. But also, he won't be making a presentation, but if there's a question that he can answer, we may ask him to unmute. So again, please be welcome to put questions in the chat or to use the raised hand function and ask a question, unmute and ask a question. We'll take a little time right now for questions about anything you've heard and then move on to the response of Alongside Hope. Susan's just noted in the chat, I was once a manager for Canadian Feed the Children in the Okanagan, and we partnered with ADRA and the Canadian Red Cross. So happy to be part of this presentation because I see Alongside Hope as the Anglican response. I believe in thinking global and acting local, and vice versa, I would add. Other questions? I can't see everybody all at once, so using the raised hand function under React would be, we're on the React, with the React button down at the bottom would be helpful. Bar.
Excuse me, when does the 90-day period end? And is there any sense of optimism that there's going to be anything of a significant change in light of people's becoming aware, I guess is the question, in these 90 days? I know that you indicated, Jackie, that Marco Rubio claims after 90 days, this will just become a permanent end.
I imagine one of my colleagues is quickly crunching numbers. I think we're at day 76, somewhere in the 70s,
wow.
I think.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, I could be wrong, and if someone wants to jump in and correct me, please do, but we're getting close to the 90 days. I think two comments related to that. If there is reason for optimism around any funding being restored, I think it's most likely on the humanitarian because that benefits American farmers, and the PEPFAR funding or the antiretroviral funding because that benefits American pharmaceutical companies. So those are two big areas where you can directly see the line to to American economic interests, and perhaps those being restarted. The challenge, of course, is that this is a complex system with big portions that have been completely eliminated. And so restoring funding is one thing. Having the mechanisms and the avenues for funding to be dispersed is an entirely different thing. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a wait and see in terms of how possible it is to move funding without the infrastructure that used to be there, given the robust size of USAID staffing. So wait and see. I think for me, those are the only two that I see any reason to think would return. But there may be a program here or there as well. But there has been quite a bit of advocacy as well in the US by faith-based actors to their various members of Congress. So
I believe it's April 19th.
April 9th. Thanks, Andrew.
Advocacy, and I would add legal cases being brought around both the international aid piece and the refugee and immigration work.
Yeah, and we saw as well at the beginning, it was the complete elimination of USAID, but because it's a congressionally established agency, it's now just going to be reduced to 15 staff. So it will still exist, but as 15 staff.
Thanks, Jackie. I see the Heathers have a question and then one in the chat. Heather? And Heather? Just need to unmute.
Sorry, yes. First of all, just stunning, an excellent presentation of putting it into a teacup. I know it's very broad. I don't really have a question, but to say that as with a number of other areas that we exist in, it is driving us, and obviously there was an example from another jurisdiction of how you find those resources internally. But it's so stunning. I feel my role as a parish representative here in St. Albert is simply to bring this forward as best I can. And that's what I see personally. And I always have to say, although it's so stunning, it is what's the one step I can take, and that's what I see. And so that's my commentary.
Thanks, Heather. And we'll be talking just in a moment about a couple of pieces that we're asking of our volunteers, quite specific pieces of action. So thank you. Mark has a question for Louis. Over the course of the federal campaign, can you characterize the response to the need for development funds from the two major parties, the Liberals and Conservatives? Are you able
Sure.
to
Hi, everyone.
respond, Louis? Thank you.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Well, I work kind of independently. Just to be clear, I run a campaign called Bigger Than Our Borders, which is sort of arm's length from Corporation Canada. I'm a bit of a freelance, and my experience is within government, right? I was the director of communication for 5 ministers inside the good old Trudeau administration, but I left and now I'm running this campaign called Aid Works. To answer your question, well, I think the position from the Conservative has been pretty clear, right? If you follow the news, Mr. Poilievre has said that he will cut foreign aid. He will, we don't have the numbers yet, but he's been very clear that he will be cutting, funding for major UN agencies, agencies like the Asia Development Bank, agencies like the UN support system for Palestinians. He will cut funding on climate change, and I can go on, but I don't want to depress you too much today. And he will use the money, so whether it's 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion, to fund the new naval base in up north in the Arctic. So that is pretty astonishing. We have tried to, if I want to be super transparent with you, we have tried to meet with the Conservatives. Over the last 4 months, we have sent around 5 requests to Pierre Poilievre's top advisors, and they refused to meet with us. So that's going great. They just say we are busy doing something else, and we'll talk after the campaign. So that's the Conservative, and I'm not trying to be cute. I'm trying to be super honest with you. It's been quite difficult to engage with them. And it's become part of his stump speech, right? Like now it's not just a tweet or one mention here and there. It's every day on his stump speech, he says he will be cutting foreign aid. So have no doubt that someone like Pierre Poilievre will show up if he's elected. And it's not going to, well, you know what? I changed my mind. I've been saying this for 3 years and I think I made a mistake. I think he will do it. So I think we should be absolutely clear about the Conservatives' position. On the other hand, the Liberals, if you follow the debates and you followed Mr. Carney, he's mentioned foreign aid a few times, kind of in comparison to Poilievre, linking it to Trump, saying this is what he's proposing, right? I'm not proposing that. I don't think we should cut foreign aid. He doesn't say we should increase it or we should divert it but the signals are positive and that's a good thing. So I don't know, I can go on and on about the policies and politics of things, but so far my job as an advocate, especially on the digital side of things, is to say what the title of this meeting says, is that aid works. And the 3 message I'm trying to put forward is that aid has an impact, aid is in our interest, and aid is not wasted. So to counteract the Trump and Elon Musk and Pierre Poilievre's narrative that it's all just a waste, it's all going to dictators and terrorists and I don't know where, but it's all wasted. So the three message I'm trying to hammer for the next, I don't know, few weeks, aid has an impact, it's in our national interest, and it is not wasted. So I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Louis. And I think a fourth one that we would add as a faith-based organization is it's the right thing to do, and our faith calls us to it. So, thanks very much. There was a question from Susan, and then I'll need us to move on. Can anyone speak to the time when our federal government offered matching funds for members of the general public? And when, yeah, I think, Susan, would you be referring to civil society organizations, not individuals? Just checking with Susan about this.
Sorry, I think it was through the Canadian Red Cross that they said if you donate to the Canadian Red Cross, they would match the funds. And I think it was a federal program, but I could be wrong. I'm just,
Fair enough. Thanks for that clarification, Jackie. Can you respond to that?
Sure, I can. There's been a lot of evolution in that over the last, I would say, decade. So that has been an approach the Canadian government has when it comes to allocating funding to Canadian civil society actors. So we are, through the Canadian Food Grains Bank, a member of the Humanitarian Coalition. And the Humanitarian Coalition is made up, I think it's 9 organizations at the moment. And when there is a large humanitarian need in the world, the Canadian government, Global Affairs Canada, will look to the Humanitarian Coalition to establish a matching fund for funds raised by the members of Humanitarian Coalition. So we do benefit from that as a member of the Canadian Food Grains Bank, that if we join an appeal, the funds, when there is a match from the Global Affairs Canada, the funds we raise through that appeal can be matched through our Canadian Food Grains Bank membership, which is a member of Humanitarian Coalition. So it comes up maybe once or twice a year that there's a matching response from Global Affairs Canada. And when we are part of it, certainly you'll see that in our communications and on our website.
Thanks, Jackie. I'm going to pass now to Carolyn to speak about the Alongside Hope response. And just again to say, please be welcome to keep putting questions in the chat, because we will have more time for questions and answers towards the end of our time together. Carolyn.
Thanks, Suzanne. And hello, everyone. I'm going to talk just briefly, because my colleagues have already done a good job of talking about the Resilience Fund. So we launched an emergency appeal last week. We're calling it the Resilience Fund. The name came from one of our partners, Mary Obiero, who works for Church World Service. And in the face of all of this, something that Mary said was, we are resilient and we will fight. And so we are calling it our Resilience Fund. It is to raise money to support all of the initiatives that my colleagues have already spoken about, to enable us to be ready to help respond. We obviously are never going to be able to fill these gaps that have been created, but we do want to support our partners as much as we possibly can. And so I will put into the chat just the link for the Resilience Fund. But what you can do, this is one of the things that you can do, is just help us get the word out about that. So I see many of our key volunteers and supporters are here today, and thank you for that. But if you can help us by letting people know that Alongside Hope is raising funds to support our partners who are impacted by all of this. We are going to also have a bulletin insert that will go on to the web page that you'll see shortly. So you can download that for your church, and also please let others know that that's available as well. So I'll get that link into the chat for you, and that's really what I needed to say, and I'll pass it on to the other things that our key volunteers and supporters can do.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. And as Carolyn mentioned, the Resilience Fund is on our website, and I think, Janice, you're going to bring up and show us where to find that along with other resources that we'll talk about on the website. There we go.
So I've just taken you to the homepage, alongsidehope.org. And if you'll look right up in the top here, this is a place where any kind of emergency or appeal or special campaign will usually appear. So you'll see Alongside Hope launches Resilience Fund appeal and in the wake of cuts, and then you can click on view details. And that will get you my page. And so you can go that way, or you can also remember that it's alongsidehope.org/resilience-fund, resilience fund. But if you forget that URL, you can find it from the homepage. And so here we have a lot of the background and then the information about this webinar, a bullet list of how you can help, which Suzanne is going to kind of talk through. And then just as you scroll down, you can see a somewhat recent photo from a time when the lovely Naba, I'm circling him right here, visited the Nyarugusu refugee camp in Tanzania. And that's where Church World Service, one of our partners, is supporting refugees there. And so this is actually from 2023. But they are one of our partners who have been very affected by the cuts. So there's more than these 5 countries, but it's Andrea has already talked about many of them in her presentation, but this gives you an idea. And then at the bottom, you can give to the Resilience Fund. So Suzanne, do you want me to click through here and you can talk about the advocacy, or is there anything else you want to talk about on the page?
No, I think let's go on to the advocacy, and people have questions about this, we can come back to them.
Okay, maybe I'll just make that a little bit bigger for everybody.
Oh, that's a help.
Thank you. So of course, the first thing you can do is to pray, and to pray for everyone who is affected by these cuts. And now I'm just going to, or you can donate, as we've said. And I'm going to click through to this page here, which is a letter builder that Suzanne will talk us through. And then the one other thing, Carolyn had mentioned that there is there would be an emergency appeal. Oh, it's already there. There is the emergency appeal leaflet. Okay, so you can print these out and insert them in your church bulletins. You can post it up on the wall. You could read it in an announcement. You could take the text and put it into a weekly e-blast. It does include a QR code here that will take you to the Resilience Fund page for people who are looking for more information. Okay, so let's just go back. And Suzanne, why don't you talk about this?
Thank you. Thanks, Janice. So as we're all keenly aware, there's a federal election campaign underway with a very short timeline of 5 weeks. And we're in the midst of week 2, I believe, already. So there are opportunities here for us to get the message that aid works out. And so 2 things that we're asking our supporters specifically to do. One is to speak to your candidates when they come to your door, or when a town hall or an all parties or all candidates meeting takes place in your riding. Go there and ask questions, and we'll come to the questions in a minute. The other thing we would encourage you to do is to write letters to your current MP, but also to the candidates in your riding. And so for that, we've developed this letter builder. You'll see first some bullet points as sort of a basic outline for a letter, but we've also provided you with this letter builder that includes a text that you are welcome to use in full, in part, to adapt as you need. And as you can see, Janice is just highlighting there where you would put your current MP's name. And there's also opportunity there, as you can see, to describe the community you live in, the riding name, etc. And the letter basically does a number of things. It invite you to introduce yourself and ask right out front how the candidate positions themselves vis-a-vis foreign aid. What do they believe about foreign aid? It also describes briefly your support for Alongside Hope as a specific example of an organization working in this sector and the range of work that Alongside Hope is involved in. And then a paragraph about why you believe foreign aid is important for Canada and in Canada's interests, as Louis was describing. But also another paragraph specifically about why it's important to you as a person of faith, as a Christian, but also as a citizen who votes, as a Christian citizen who votes, why it's important. And you'll see there we've drawn, in fact, on the baptismal covenant to describe why it's important. Then a brief word about the current context and what we want. So it's a fairly comprehensive letter, but again, you may want to adapt it to your context, highlight particular things over others, and be welcome to make that your own. And be welcome to be in touch with us should you want any help with that. I also mentioned questions for candidates to make use of those when one of the candidates comes knocking on your door or you attend an all candidates meeting or town hall. And these are questions that have been adapted. There's quite a number of campaigns and a lot of information out there around international aid in the election, and we have tried to shape these for the general concerns, but also are coming from our specific context. And so you can see there a question about what is the candidate's vision for Canada's role in international development and humanitarian assistance. Have they had any experience, or do they know about Alongside Hope? And if they do, what did they learn? A bit of a word there about the level of funding. And as Jackie mentioned, we are at half of what we committed to internationally years ago in terms of percentage of our gross national income that we put towards aid, and other questions there that you can pose to candidates at your door or at meetings. Janice, there is also, to assist people with writing the letter and figuring out who to write to, we have, can you help me here? There it is. Who's running in your riding? There's a link there to a resource that will help you once you put in your, I believe it's your postal code, will help locate you and locate the riding you're in and the candidates who are running in your riding.
Can I just jump in for 1 second, Suzanne?
Sure.
That link is to Elections Canada. It's,
right.
so it's a trusted website. I just wanted to go back to the letter builder. Once you've made your changes and taken out any bold things that might indicate that you were using a form template, then all you have to do is go like this and oopsie. Oh my gosh. Okay, sorry. Copy it and then paste it into the body of an email. Or if you would prefer to do a letter, then you can paste it into whatever your Word, like either Microsoft Word or Pages or TextEdit, whatever program you use on the computer. Or if you're like, write it out by hand, knock yourself out. But anyway, it's really meant to be a start. You might have more personal experience to add. You may want to make it shorter. You may not, want to lean into the baptismal covenant, but that's your choice, obviously. So you can just delete parts of the letter, and then you won't be changing anything on the website. It's just a letter builder. So that's how that works.
Thanks, Janice. Yeah. So there, in the spirit of pray, act, give, we invite you to pray, to act, and to respond to the Resilience Fund and to get the word out about it, as Carolyn mentioned. we've got a bit more time for Q&A, and it could be about the current situation or about our response or, yeah. Any questions, comments? Mark?
Thanks, Suzanne. Just a thank you very much. This is a great information. It's a great campaign. Really exciting. Glad to see it. For all volunteers, one of the things I'm going to do, I've already done actually, and it may make things a little easier for people, is you can go on to CBC Poll Tracker. And there's other sites you can go to, and you can find out who's well, you probably know anyway, but who's likely to win in your riding. So you're not reaching out to 5 or 6 candidates if you don't think you have the time to do that. I mean, you can go to the candidates meetings. That's great. They'll all be there. So I just want to throw that suggestion out there to people if they're finding they're not having a lot of time, and if they want to use their an effort to really meet these candidates, maybe focus on maybe the 2 that were most likely to win. And that information is easy to find if you don't know it. But anyway, great job. Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Mark, and thanks for that strategic thinking. Mark, I failed to mention, is the chair of the board of Alongside Hope. So we have a strategic thinker as our chair. Thanks so much. Louis, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't know if we're out of time.
No,
but yeah.
we've got some time. Yeah.
Okay, so well, congratulations. This is great. I'm so glad I joined. Thanks, Janice, for inviting me. And sorry I was a bit late, but this is kind of everything you want to see from a local and dedicated and passionate NGO. I just want to congratulate you on just being here and being present on the election. Having worked in a campaign and inside the Liberal campaign, I got to say that to Mark's point, if you're in a riding that's close, if you're a smart candidate, you are now calling people and you're knocking on doors, and you might go to 1 or 2 or 3 events to sort of debate with the other candidates. But knocking on doors that's why people do it, so that they know which, who's on your side and who's not. And then on D-Day, they start calling people, the GOTV, go get out the vote, which is the old Obama strategy. So I'm saying all this because the one thing that you could do that can make a candidate listen to you is show up at an event, show up at a debate, and ask a really smart and clear question. And the reason I'm saying that is because local media will always be there. There's a risk that the candidate will say something great or something not great, and then the next thing you know, it's in the paper, and then that candidate says something that doesn't reflect the party or went too far or confirm something that you can hold, make them accountable to. So do you see what I mean? And that makes people like me in the communication and running a campaign really nervous about about these events. But people like you, it's kind of all your fault, making candidates really nervous. And that's good. So if you can do one thing, of course, you can write an email, you can call a candidate, you can stop them on their way and shake their hands. But when you're at a debate and there's local media and people on their phone tweeting and all this, it creates sort of like a buzz. So if you ask a smart question, your question can go a long way. So congratulations on this campaign, on trying to raise money, on trying to raise awareness. This is exactly what we need. So well done. Wow.
Thanks, Louis. Those are good tips, and yeah, very helpful. Mary Salonen Martin, did I see your hand up and it's not now? Did you have a question?
Yes, you did, but it was answered, so that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, great. There were a couple of questions in the chat that I wanted to come back to. One is, what is the Anglican Church, that would be the Episcopal Church, doing in the US? And I'm wondering if any one of us wants to try and respond to that.
About Episcopal Relief and Development, the Anglican sort of version of Alongside Hope. I mean, I think probably most of us will remember Bishop Buddy at the prayer service after the inauguration day and the statement that she made, which, I mean, really a prophetic voice in this moment. And that certainly put the Anglican Church on the radar of the US administration. And that is something that is a concern for ERD. How do you operate in a system where, yeah, there is a lot of political pressure, but there's also, you know, the moral place that you hold in this moment as well. So we work in partnership and as a peer with ERD, and we have a number of shared partners around the world. So I've met a number of times with their director of operations to just look at ways that we can make sure that we're coordinating well, that if they are responding, can we come alongside a response that they're working on? If we're responding, can they come alongside a response that we're doing? So we do look at places where we can collaborate with ERD in the US. So.
And maybe just to add briefly to that, Jackie, Episcopal Migration Ministries, which was one of the key organizations settling refugees in the US, again, with funding from the US government, has basically been shut down because the refugee settlement program has been terminated. They are, however, continuing as they can to provide education, information resources to both local parishes and organizations working with folk who are in the US now, refugees or migrants, on Know Your Rights campaigns. What do you have as rights in the US? And a couple of legal cases have also been brought by the Episcopal Church and other denominations regarding the migration, the shutdown of the refugee program, as well as what's happening with detentions and deportations, particularly in the case of the churches, a case regarding violations of the right to worship in safety, because U.S. ICE, their immigration services, have been entering schools, and churches, which were considered safe spaces, are no longer. Cynthia.
Hey, so I want to say thank you, although, what we heard can be really depressing. But I think two things that have made this a little bit less depressing for me today than it has been is I heard a lot of what Jackie had to say at our executive committee meeting, but not some of the other stuff. But the prayer at the beginning, which is about now, is the first thing that I found, well, actually it gives us hope. And the second was the practical steps that you provide, first in the resilience fund, but also in the questions to ask candidates or in the letters. It just feels like here are things you can do so we don't feel helpless and hopeless, but we can advocate. So thank you to all of you.
Thanks, Cynthia. I noticed a couple of other questions, one from Deborah Panton. For folks who are monthly donors of selected put my funds in the area of greatest need, would any of that end up in the resilience fund, or should we now give specifically to that fund? Carolyn, could you respond to that?
Sure. So yes, there are many areas of greatest need right now. Obviously, this is one of them. So we will be using some of the general funds that come in to fund some of the work that we've talked about earlier. But that said, we do appreciate additional gifts for this. This is an emergency appeal that we have put out. We do still need to continue to fund all of our regular programming with our partners that we've already committed to. This is something that is above and beyond, something in addition. So additional gifts are very welcomed and appreciated.
Thanks, Carolyn. And I see a few more comments that people might want to look at in the chat just around rewriting of electoral boundaries and other, shall I call them political shenanigans that have been going on in the lead up to the election. Susan mentions both Fair Vote Canada and Lead Now initiatives as places to look for resources. Are there any other questions, comments before we wrap up? Again, if you think of something after this webinar and have a question, do reach out to us. We'll be happy to respond. And we'll update that page that we showed to you as needed if there is new information that comes to light. Bar, you had a question. You've got a hand up and a hand up.
Oh, okay, sorry. This is a question that actually is not specific to the information we've just been given, but it is a question that I've wondered about. Are we forming any kind of a humanitarian response to the situation in Myanmar?
Jackie, can you take that one?
Yeah, I can. The answer is yes, but the situation in Myanmar, as you probably know, is incredibly complicated. It is a country under a military rule at the moment with an ongoing civil war. The location of the earthquake is an area that's not controlled by the military. And so actually there's been ongoing bombardments of some of the cities that have been devastated by this earthquake. So there are real challenges getting humanitarian assistance into the areas. In the past week, I've been on calls with ACT Alliance about ecumenical networks, and there are a couple ACT members that were already working in the country before the earthquake in response to the civil war. So they are looking at what's possible for them in terms of reach and scope. And so we have indicated our willingness to support any efforts that they're able to put forward. We've also had conversations. We are a member of Anglican Alliance, and there are approximately 70,000 Anglicans in Myanmar. So there is a church response that is being developed at the moment, but there are far more constraints on a church response in the country than there are on perhaps less religious affiliated organizations operating in the country. So we had a time of prayer with the Anglican colleagues in Myanmar yesterday, and really looking at ways that we can stand in solidarity, recognizing that we may have two different avenues to support a response. And also, unfortunately, just very cognizant that it's not making headline news in Canada. With everything else going on, there's just not as much attention to the situation as the need would normally necessitate. So being realistic about the level of support that we can commit ourselves to at the moment. But certainly it's something we are following closely and looking for ways that we can stand in solidarity there as well.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jackie. I realized I missed a note in the chat by Louis, and I think, Louis, is this in response to the question about what is the church doing in the U.S.? Do you want to just say a little bit more about what you wrote there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole movement in the U.S. that are really trying to change the mind. I mean, someone asked, when is the 90-day over? Well, it's they're really trying to work as quickly as possible to convince Congress to do something, right? So Marco Rubio has already, it seems, made his decisions, and people are getting fired, as you've seen, but nonetheless, people are really pushing hard on congressmen and congresswomen to reverse that decision, because it is unconstitutional to completely, sort of close down an agency that is funded with the agreement of Congress. So I know that this particular group was working hand in glove with George W. Bush way back then, and created this incredible program of PEPFAR that saved millions and millions of lives. And it's it's active, and Interaction is the equivalent in the US of Cooperation Canada, which is probably at seen is funding cut by about 90%. So they have let go everyone. But for the reminding, the people were working for free, pro bono, to really try to lobby Congress to stop the cuts. So lots is happening in the US. I don't know how successful they will be, but now the talks, and that's what I've heard from colleagues at Global Affairs Canada who are talking to their Americans counterpart, is that there is a push to, and I'm sure you've read about it, to create a new agency. So the new USAID will be focused on global health and humanitarian response. So really focus on two things and two things only. So that's kind of what we've been hearing. But the question earlier was the right one. Like, the executive order said 90 days, so you would think that they would wait those 90 days before making a decisions, but yeah, they're acting pretty swiftly.
Just to add to that, if anyone is interested, I don't know if you saw Cory Booker's 25-hour marathon speech, but in that he has about an hour and a half specific to USAID, where he reads through a lot of the initiatives that are underway to counter the cuts. So it was a very good synopsis of a whole lot of different initiatives.
This is Senator Cory Booker, who just broke the record for longest speech in the Senate. We did talk about Pray, Act, Give. We began with prayer and we'll close with prayer. But before we do, just want to mention that next Thursday, so a week today at 1 o'clock, we'll be holding our regular praying with Alongside Hope session, and Archbishop Andremon, the acting primate, will be with us for that as we mark the 5th anniversary of Praying with Alongside Hope, which, for those of you who don't know, we began in the early days of the pandemic and have continued to gather for prayer, reflection, music, fellowship, now once a month on the second Thursday of the month. So if you're able to join us next Thursday, we'd love to have you with us. And I'm going to close us with the prayer that we developed early on in the early days of the pandemic, from words and phrases gathered from those who were gathered online, and we call it a prayer for alongside hope. So let us pray. God of hope, in an ever more connected world, you call us together in acts of caring, and you call us to uphold the dignity of every human being by transforming structures that deny that dignity. Child of peace, you invite us into friendship with you, you who are present in the vulnerable and marginalized communities in Canada and throughout the world. You challenge us to recommit and rededicate ourselves to ensuring their agency and to making the whole world safe. Spirit of love, you speak to us through the smiling faces of our partners whose generosity of reflective, focused, and mindful caring calls forth our own generosity as we share food, share health, share our lives. God, child, Spirit, in this uncertain time, hold us, the people and partners of Alongside Hope, in your loving embrace, and walk with us as we continue on the journey toward a truly just, healthy, and peaceful world. Amen. Thank you, everyone.